Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HUD OCIO learning session. I'm Dr. Melanie Cohen. Today's topic is leadership, conversations, and breakthrough results. Leaders at all levels in every sector of our economy are charged with and are responsible for producing extraordinary results with limited resources and often under increasing pressures from various constituents with conflicting demands. In an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, leaders are challenged as well as required to think creatively in order to produce unprecedented breakthroughs and results. Let me introduce our guests. Vinay Kumar coaches and educates leaders in sectors that include IT and engineering, healthcare, nonprofits, and the government. He is with the TOCO Corporation, which has offices in 15 countries and serves clients in over 100 countries. Vinay also serves on the faculty of the Leadership Awareness Institute. Vinay is the co-author of Language and the Pursuit of Leadership Excellence: How Extraordinary Leaders Build Relationships, Shape Culture, and Drive Breakthrough Results, and the author of Customers, Love 'Em or Lose 'Em, 57 Ways to Love Your Customers. Lynne Feingold is Program Manager for Coaching and Leader Development at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. As creator of the first government-wide coaching cadre and co-founder of the government-wide coaching consortium, Lynne laid the groundwork for what is now the Federal Coaching Network, which won the Best Federal Development Program Human Capital Award in 2014. Dr.Carylynn Larson is an organizational psychologist and leadership coach. She founded Creating Open Space, a coaching and consulting company that supports scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurial leaders around the globe. Carrie holds a BS in biological psychology from Centre College and a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from George Mason University and a certificate in leadership coaching from Georgetown University. Vinay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Melanie. Melanie, I think you'll agree that that the rate of change continues to increase faster and faster, and there's more and more market disruptions. I mean, let's take a look at some areas. For example, we look at organizational life cycles. I was reading somewhere that of the Fortune 500 companies that existed in the 50s, less than 10% of them are in existence today. Mm-hmm. That's phenomenal. If you look at our own postal service, it's been around for decades, and the mail volumes are rapidly declining, and they're facing significant financial challenges as that is happening. We look at products. I mean, think of beepers and fax machines. They came and they went. And we look at what Uber is doing to the taxi service, and what Amazon's done to the bookstores, and what Netflix is doing to all these, for example, Blockbusters and other organizations that used to rent out CDs for movies. It's just faster. We look at careers. People are having, 3 or 4 or 5 careers in their lifetime. It is VUCA on steroids. And we don't see this slowing down anytime soon. Everything is connected, interconnected, and everything affects everything. How does one lead in such an environment? Let's take a look at that today.
Okay.
And as we thought about it, it reminded me of this quote from Albert Einstein, which is so powerful. He said, a number of years ago, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. This got me thinking, what is some of the current ways of thinking for which we operate and we conduct ourselves and from which we lead our organizations and our teams? I noted down some of them. For one of them is, for example, the way I see things is the way things are. We tend to think that the way I see things is the right way, and if someone sees things differently, and if I think I'm right, what does that make them? No wonder we're becoming so divided. Mm-hmm. And it's getting more and more. Another one I thought about is that, we just need to work harder and faster. Well, we're already connected almost 24/7. Right. How much more are we going to run, and how much harder can we run? There's got to be a different way. Another one I thought about is that, the more I have, the higher I go, the better. Is it really? Have we ever questioned that? Another one, that, for me to win, someone's got to lose. We have this win-lose way of operating, and is that really working anymore? So the more I think about this quote, the more it occurs to me that perhaps the paradigms, the beliefs from which we've been operating, it's time to re-examine them if we're going to succeed in these times today. So this brings up the question, what's all this got to do with leadership? This is what someone means to me, is looking at our thinking. But what does it mean to you, Carrie?
Sure. I love this quote and use it a lot when I'm facilitating meetings and such. And it's interesting. What I find is that we often read this quote and sometimes we think that it means that we should be more innovative or more creative, right? That we need to really push ourselves to get outside the box, right? And I don't think that that's actually what it means. I feel that Einstein was getting at something really a level deeper. And it speaks to what you were saying, Vinay, but it's not about being more creative or more innovative or even, quote unquote, getting outside the box. It's really about recognizing that our perspective is very limited. And because of my history and my experiences, the education that I had, my upbringing, right, the way that I have interacted with the world, I am only capable of seeing things from my perspective. And that's very, very limited. And so Einstein was a brilliant man, and I have to think that what he's really getting at here is the importance of bringing in outside perspectives, the power of leveraging other people's perspectives, right? And you can't just get out of your box. I don't think it's that easy, right? I think you really have to open yourself up to others' perspectives being as equally valid as your own, right? Not wrong or right, but equally valid and perhaps more helpful.
Indeed, indeed. Everyone sees things differently. They're all valid perspectives. Not some are more powerful than others, given the results we want, but they're all valid. And if I was in their shoes, I would see things the same way. It's all valid, right? Yeah. How about you?
It's so interesting, Vinay and Carrie, what you say, because it really is all about perspective. And what comes to my mind is the metaphor of the dance floor. How different is it to be on the dance floor with other people, and then what happens when you go up to the balcony and you look down at the dance floor? What a different view that you get. What a different perspective. And I think that's what we're talking about, is being able to move in different perspectives, because we all have different perspectives and we learn from each other.
Indeed. Beautifully said.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I've seen this quote a lot and I think about the word problem. And so I think problem is kind of a negative word. And I think, and of course, who knows what Einstein was thinking when he said that. But I also, what I think about is that we need to look at context a lot when we're dealing with issues. And I think that's kind of what that quote gets to. It's not really about solving a problem like a concrete problem. It's about looking at context, understanding context in a grand scheme, and taking in different perspectives. So I think it's a much, much larger, and of course, none of us really know what he meant, but I think, as we all think about it, it kind of brings this whole new thinking, and that's what we're all talking about here, is different thinking. So that's what I would get out of it.
Yeah, indeed, Melanie. It could be also mean, how do we pursue opportunities? How do we look at our current environments? How do we look at our landscape?
Right.
How do we examine what's happening in the environment in our world today through a different lens and different way of thinking? Because it's not just addressing problems, maybe different opportunities begin to emerge, or different things we can achieve, which we could not with the old way of thinking.
Right.
So indeed, it's a much larger, it is about context so much. So as we go further into this, the question becomes, what's this got to do with leading and achieving the important results we're charged with achieving in our organization today? And it brings us to this model that Chris Argyris from Harvard developed a number of years ago. And what it says basically is that as leaders, we're charged with producing important results, whatever they may be. Results, achieving and fulfilling our missions. Again, it varies by organizations. And it's obvious that obvious, and I realize that word, what's obvious to one person may not be obvious to another.
Right.
To achieve our important results, we must take action. And if that action works, we do it again if you want the same result again. But does it happen at times, or has it happened that you're trying to achieve an outcome, you have tried everything possible, but nothing works? What's available to us at that moment in time? What do we do, right? So at that moment, it really becomes very clear to understand where's that action coming from? Because oftentimes we focus on the action. What can we do? What more can we do? What we don't bring into mind is where's that action coming from? And I believe, and we believe, this is where our breakthroughs begin. It's taking a look at how we look at things. It's all about perspective. When we reframe, or we look at something differently, a whole new set of possibilities begin to open up. And as we were talking about thinking earlier, it's very different when we lead from a win-lose mind frame way of thinking. It's very different than leading from, say, a win-win mind frame. It's very different. We lead from a place of, I'm right and you're wrong, as opposed to I'm right and you're also right, and what can we learn from each other? It opens up different possibilities. So really taking a look at how we look at things and where's the action coming from is where I believe the answer reside in how to lead in our complex times.
If I could just add one thing there, that has a lot to do with language, right? It's how we talk. So if we are having a conversation and I don't necessarily think what you're saying is right, if I don't actually come out and say, no, that's wrong, I say, I understand what you're saying, think about this also. That sort of helps begin to incorporate those ideas of win-win, right? Because I may not agree with you, and you may not agree with me, but let's think about the whole thing in one large grand scale. And it begins to sort of incorporate this new sense of thinking, language, which is what you're talking about in your book.
Indeed, Melanie. It can be also like, instead of saying you're wrong and I'm right, we can say, help me understand where you're coming from. How do you see things that I'm not seeing? How do you go from this event to this understanding? And it's so different than how I went to it. Now we can learn from each other. We can engage in dialogue by expanding our thinking as opposed to getting into this right-wrong debate. And that is a very, very powerful shift when that happens.
One other point before we move from this slide is you mentioned Argyris's work, which was the double loop learning, which is all about reflection, which I think is another point that you make in your book, is about thinking through and reflecting upon the situation so that those same situations don't happen again in the future.
Indeed, right? So often we act from our thinking, we don't act on our thinking. We don't take a look at how am I looking at things and how can I think about it and how can I see it differently. When that happens, so many new venues and new possibilities begin to open up. And we'll dig deeper on that in this conversation.
Okay, great.
But great points. So to make some points here, let's look at an activity here. For example, as you look at this, every day, it's an ordinary box. What do you see here? Think about its physical characteristics. Think about what you can do with it. Think about possibilities, what you can create with it. What do you see? Let's just take a look at this.
Wow, well, context is everything, and my birthday's coming up next week, so I see gifts in there.
Yeah, it depends on the day. I've used this exercise so many times, and my answer is always different, right? So a box itself doesn't necessarily mean something to me. What means something to me is the box, right? In the context, like you said, Lynn, of what the day is. And so for me today, it's pouring down rain when I was coming over here. And so when I was looking at this morning, I thought it's something to put over my head to stay dry, right? So it just depends. It depends.
Indeed. Melanie, what do you see?
Well, sometimes when I do presentations and I'm doing something on design thinking, I use a group of boxes. And so those group of boxes represent confinement to me. I don't necessarily, I see, something that has edges that is confined. And so I'm not a fan of thinking outside the box, that phrase, but I am a fan of we can flatten that and that's still a box, right? It could be just flat along the table. It's still a box, but what you now see are, how it's expanded into your environment. So I see confinement when I look at a box.
So it's interesting, we're all looking at the same box with our eyes.
Right.
One sees, gifts. One sees, shelter from rain.
Right.
And you're seeing confinement. Isn't that amazing? And that difference has nothing to do with our eyes.
Right. It's perception, it's bias, it's, you're bringing yourself into it.
And think about this. What would someone who makes cardboard boxes, what would they see? Someone who actually manufactures the cardboard itself, from which the box is made. What about someone who's the business of boxes? what would they see? They might see dollars and cents, or whichever currency they're operating in, right? They might see different sizes, and they might see, oh, this is what the box cost, and this is what I can sell it for in the marketplace. I see profits and things like that. So we all see differently. And again, that difference has nothing to do with our retinas. It has everything to do with our knowledge and distinctions and experiences, and that matters, right?
Vinay, too, think about the current moment impact, right? So I think about this a lot in organizations. The energy sort of in the environment at any given time really has a huge effect on your thinking, right? So again, sort of my example of using it as cover, when I think about that, like, why would I think of such a utilitarian use of it, right? When it's pouring down rain and you're trying to stay dry, right? Maybe you forgot your umbrella. But it's almost like protectionism, right? You're in a mindset of protectionism. And in our organizations, we have a lot of organizations, right, that are really in mindsets of protectionism. And I have to think that that makes people think of very utilitarian things versus when you get in a seminar or in a workshop, or maybe you're in an organization, right, that just has a lot of space, right, to think and to expand, then you might get a lot more creative in, or abstract, right, in what the box would mean to you. It just seems to me that on a day-to-day basis, we don't think about the impact of day-to-day events on how we see, right? We talk a lot about, I like to talk about how mood really affects what you see, just your mood at any given moment.
Indeed, and it's interesting that we're just seeing something very basic. In an organization, there's so many moving parts and so much greater complexity, and we all see, and there's so many more people, so many more perspectives, and in that lies so many opportunities as well. Yeah.
And speaking to Carrie's thing about creativity, just imagine if all of us put together all our different perspectives, how much greater and richer it can be. That is the process of creativity, really taking in everybody's perspectives, and there just isn't one way. And that we all make different distinctions based on who we are, our experience, how we think, and what we bring. And what a wonderful organization it is when it values diversity and all the perspectives. So I see the box because it's my birthday coming up, and Carrie sees it one way, and Vinay, and how rich that is. There is no one way.
Indeed.
And that's a very interesting point. So let's think about, we can look at this, and it's a box, and think about in meetings that we go to in our organizations, right? We're all perhaps seeing the same thing, hearing the same thing, but from our own bias, we're thinking something different, right? And then if we don't share that, when we leave that meeting, we all have a different impression of what's going on. So that's why I think it's also very important in organizations, in meetings, to share the perspective, because otherwise people can walk out and think they understand, and perhaps they don't.
That's interesting, because also when we can look at the same thing, we all see different aspects of it. There's some things I might see, there's something you might see, there's something you might see. And forget about interpretation. We even see physically different things, and we also miss certain things. And therefore, the diversity and bringing different people together is so important to be truly successful, even more successful in organizations. And in building on what you shared, is I've done this activity around the globe in many different countries. And again, a simple box, and it's interesting, when we ask them individually, what do you see? Some see storage devices. Right? Some see mailing devices. Some see art. I can paint it. I can make a picture frame out of it. I can decorate it. Or some say, I can put an animal shelter. Or some will say, I can make products. I can put wheels on there, and I can make a go-kart if it's a bigger box. Or I can make a robot. One person said, and I still remember this, said, Vin, I can cut it up, light it up, and hold it up to the fire alarm and see if it's working. Mischievous minds, but hey, we're not going there, right? But different possibilities. And what's also amazing is that when we put people together and say, now what do you see collectively, it's amazing that one idea triggers another idea. So while individually they might see, say 10 ideas, collectively they might generate 20 or 30 ideas. That's powerful. That's powerful.
And what we don't have is conversations about this, right? To your point, what we don't have is groups of people in a room that say things like, when you heard the director make that speech, what did you hear? How did you hear that? We don't have conversations about our perception.
It's just amazing. We're just talking about a box here. Look at what's coming up right here. It's a great example, right?
And then we make assumptions, like to your point, Carrie, we make assumptions that people are thinking like we are, and yet bringing out the conversation that we all do see things differently. There's no one reality. We all see things differently. So important for the conversation.
Indeed, indeed. Let's take another example here. A little bit different, but similar concept. Here's a picture of, presumably two sisters. I just take a look at this. What do you see? Think about, physically what do you see in the image? And think about, what kind of mood they're living in, they might be living in. And while we don't know the exact content, what might be the flavor of the internal conversation going on? What comes up here?
Yeah, I love this picture. And if anybody is watching and can't actually read the words on it, you've got two sisters, right? And one of them, the same words coming out of their mouth or in their head, but one of them says, you could just see it, I'm dressed just like my sister, right? The younger one, of course. And the older sister is like, I'm dressed just like my sister. So you could just read the emotion and the difference in their perspective. Again, same words, very different perspectives. And I can think of lots of examples of this, right? Just the other day, I was working with a group of people, and their director's office is asking them to really broaden and expand their responsibilities. And it was actually a participant in the room, a member of that group, who brought to the table that the way that you view this, right, increased scope of responsibility, will have such a great impact on how that office responds. And so we had a great conversation about it, right? And it was clear to me that there were people in that room that saw this as the director dumping on them, right? And there were people in the room that saw this as a phenomenal, display of trust, right? A phenomenal privilege to be asked to take on these really high-level, expansive challenges. And it just reminded me that power. And if those people move forward, right, with the perspective that they're dumped on, what will the result be? Versus if they move forward with the perspective. And everybody was coming at it from a different starting point. And I think what we have a responsibility to do, right, in our organizations is help people get to the more powerful perspective and help them recognize that they're actually at choice, right? So the older sister in this picture actually is choosing to say, I'm dressed just like my sister, right? She's choosing that. And until she realizes that she's actually has a power of choice over walking out of the house that way and being grumpy about it, right? All day, presumably, she could choose to be happy. And that might actually help her have a better day. And we talk about employee engagement and job satisfaction, and so much of it's actually our choice. So that's what this brings up for me.
And so powerful when we help people to see that they are at choice, as opposed to this is the way it is. I mean, there's such power in that, and that's what we need to do in organizations. I mean, there's so many examples of this. A boss that asks a million questions, and one employee loves it because they have the chance to really share their opinions, and another employee says, gosh, doesn't this boss trust me? How many questions do I have to be asked? It's all about perspective, and we all see it differently. And one is very engaging, as you say, Carrie, and one is doesn't feel so good.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, but I think that also has to do a little bit with it's sort of an internal, external sort of thing. So, right? So it's how the person feels at the time and what their perspective is. It's also what's coming at them externally. That boss may ask 1,000 questions, but are you asking them in a way that's going to elicit someone really wanting to engage with you, or are you asking those questions in a very critical sort of way? So that has an impact on the whole dynamic of the situation. This picture is very interesting, though, because it's same words, same dress, same situation. They're going to the same event. They're holding hands, right? But the way they perceive that is so very different. And again, I like to get back to organizations. How does this impact us in our organizations? We go to the same meetings. We hear the same words. We go to the same events. How do we each perceive that? you know, how is that message coming to us, and what mood are we in when we hear that message? So there's so much in terms of the dynamics of these sorts of things.
Yeah, mood is really critical, right? The mood impacts in terms
The
of
mood
our
is
interpretation,
critical.
and our interpretation impacts the mood. I mean, if you look at the two
Right.
sisters here, the taller one, you know, what kind of words are likely to come out of her mouth? Think about her relationships. Think about the mood that's being created. Think about the other sister, the younger one. You know, what kind of words are likely to come out of her mouth, and what kind of relationship she's forming. And say you're forming a project team. Which
Right.
one do you invite? And which one do you say, you know, we'd love to have you, but right now there just really is not space at the moment in time, right? Thank you very much. Thank you for your interest, but not right now. And do you think they're aware of it, the mood they're living in, and the stories they're making, or are they simply acting through it? Because most of the time what I find is people not aware of it. They're not aware that they're making it the story, they're taking action from that story. The way we say it, event is not the same as explanation, right? Things happen in our life. You know, in this case, for example, two sisters have the exact same dress, or similar dress, I should say, technically to be correct. and each one's making up a story, an interpretation, but often they're not aware of it. They think their interpretation is the way things are. And from that interpretation, they take action and produce what they produce. So a really key learning in life is to separate the fact from the story. And then we can begin to, on purpose, author different interpretations that can better serve us. It's a key learning, right? And think about what you were mentioning, Lynne, you know, in project teams, you know, when we can bring different perspective, different diversity, different cross-functional teams, you know, finance with, you know, with say HR, with, you know, engineering and leadership, and different organizations and different teams can see so many more possibilities. And when they realize they have a perspective, a lens, interpretation, it opens them up to other possibilities. That leads to breakthroughs, right?
And that also leads to workforce engagement when people really feel heard. And to feel heard, we have to have the conversations where we let our perspectives be heard, and recognizing that there are different perspectives, that there is not just one.
Yeah, and when we ask people, how do you see it? They suddenly become more engaged. Like my perspective, what I have to say also matters.
It
right?
matters.
You know, we want engagement in organizations. You know, we oftentimes are so busy telling, is my experience, ask them, engage them, and ask them, you know, get their perspective. How do you see it? What would you do? Suddenly people begin to offer ideas, and now it's their idea. It's amazing.
But let's think about our typical meetings. In our typical meetings, they're usually about status of tasks, right? Where are you on this? It's less about, here's our task. How do you all see how this is working together? Let's get everyone's opinion. I think if we change the way some of these meetings run, and we actually begin to engage people more in the development of what needs to be done versus just tell me what you're doing, that can kind of bring about these differences.
That's a really key point, Melanie, because going back to the observer action results that Chris Hodger is, in our meetings, we often talk about the actions. What would you do? And we're assessing them, whether it's going to move us forward or not. What would really change the conversation is when someone offers up an idea or an action, hey, where's that idea coming from? How do you see the situation? How do you see this working? And that conversation we don't have. We talk about what would you do, but what we don't ask is, how do you see it?
What's important to you? What is that about? Tell me more. Really get into how the person's thinking inside.
And
Well,
that's powerful.
I think, too, oftentimes when we're in problem-solving meetings, in a way, the solution is presented along with the problem. So you have an organizational problem, and the way the problem is presented, sometimes the solution's already inherent in the discussion. And so it doesn't allow for a lot of open conversation. And again, if we can get away from those sorts of things and open it up to these ideas that you're laying forward, I think we could get to different resolution of issues so that we're not, sometimes feels like we're solving the same problem repeatedly.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, let's go to the next slide here.
All right, so we brought my favorite prop along, kaleidoscopes.
Here we go.
These are things that I give out in two contexts. I actually give, these are Vinay's, he brought these. I give these very same ones to all of my son's friends for birthday presents, like our signature gift. I hope they like kaleidoscopes. I also give it to all my coaching clients as a way of closing out our coaching, because I think it's such a powerful analogy. So we wanted something to get people thinking about the power of different perspectives. And so I'm just going to ask each of us, right, to look through it.
Okay.
And look through it once and tell me what you see without shifting it. Just what is there?
I see the Mardi Gras. All the beautiful beads and necklaces.
About you, Vinay?
I'm an engineer, so I see beads, I see different colors and different shapes.
Triangles.
I don't see Mardi Gras.
I see candy. I see jewelry.
I
What do
see,
you see?
it reminds me of crystals. It reminds me of something I might see when you're looking at those pictures from outer space sometimes.
So now shift it just a little bit,
Okay.
right? Now what's there?
More beads and different colors, different shapes.
Vinay, you and I are going to have coaching.
It's interesting. I love kaleidoscopes. I love the concept of a kaleidoscope. I see the same. I just see sort of more crystals and more colors. But kaleidoscopes I find a little bit inspiring because of the creativity that they bring about. You know, because I can look at the colors and it makes me realize I could think differently.
How nice is that?
And the symbolism for me is it's such a tiny shift. Like you barely
Right.
move this. You barely move it the tiniest bit, and it's completely different. And I find that that's so true. We often get sort of caught, I think, in the learning and development, leadership development world, thinking that we'd have to do something huge, something really monumental to shift our leadership, right? To shift our way of thinking or to shift our way of seeing. And it's often the slightest thing. You know, if we hinted at mood, right? So a great example is the slightest shift in your mood actually changes everything. And we know that even shifting your body position, right? Sitting up straight, leaning in. And I love to play with this with my coaching clients. Lean in, right? Or if they're actually too sort of laser focused on something, you know, sit back. That shift physiologically actually changes what you see. And I find it fascinating that the neurological research these days is actually starting to show some of these connections and hint at some of the ways that these things are connected. So it doesn't have to be big, right? That's the message of the kaleidoscope for me. It's just a very small shift can change everything.
And also, isn't the beauty of this the fact that this is all the same stuff? There's nothing changes in here. This is all the same. So when you really think about it, what you're doing is you're making subtle changes to your existing environment. So if we did that in our own organizations, just our own body language when we meet with people, when we talk to people, shifting the way we speak, which is a key piece of your book, is about language, shifting the way we deal with people, you can make huge, huge inroads and changes in your organizations. That's also the lesson, I think, of the kaleidoscope, is that nothing new's added, but the changes are dramatic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, what you said earlier, Melanie, and what you're saying, Carrie, is that, you know, just a small shift in perspective, a different question, right? For example, for so many years, we had film. Well, maybe somebody asked the question, do we need film at all? Why not do just digital? And look what happened to the industry, right? Or I talk about Uber and the taxi service.
Right.
You know, for decades we were doing taxi the way we were taking it. Someone said, well, is there a different way of doing it? Whole different set of possibilities began to emerge. So oftentimes big changes start with small shifts.
Right.
Small change in question, small shift in perspective. It's amazing. I know, Lynne, you're doing something at CIS, I believe, in peer coaching in your cohorts.
Yes.
And can you share with us how you're applying these concepts?
Absolutely, Vinay. It's so exciting to me that through peer coaching, we're seeing these incredible results where we're tapping into people's thinking and helping them to discover whole new ways of mastering contemporary leadership challenges. And what it's really about is we're helping them in a peer cohort to solve challenges in real time. And what I mean by that is in a peer coaching group, one person each time they meet is the challenge owner, and the others coach them and help them to look at their challenges from a different perspective, from a different lens. Exactly what we're talking about today is what peer coaching does. And what I've learned is that the power of this is that people learn to see things from different perspectives. If they were on the dance floor, they go up on the balcony. And I must confess that I wasn't prepared for the enormous change that I saw in people. I'm thinking of one person who admitted that her leadership style was to tell people what to do. That's what she was comfortable with. And after peer coaching, actually in the middle of peer coaching over time, she realized the enormous power of asking questions. And to Carrie's point, it could be just a small question. So what assumptions are you making about that? What do you want? And so she learned the power of questions, of deep listening with deep presence. And her leadership style has changed 360. She got promoted during the peer cohort to become an SES. And it's expanded her whole thinking. So we're seeing changes in leadership style, changes in mindset, and even as big as world view, that people begin to become more aware of what their story is that's impacting what they see, and that they have choice to change. And this is so powerful.
You know, Lynne, maybe you could talk for just a minute. I mean, I can imagine people who are watching this, they're wondering now, peer coaching, I think, is a lot different than actually having a specific coach. So organizations could probably set up a peer coaching environment in their own organizations. Could you talk for a minute about how organizations can do that so that they can get started?
Sure, absolutely. So the difference between peer coaching and one-on-one coaching is in one-on-one coaching, you have a trained, certified coach. But in peer coaching, you're unleashing the power of your peers. And so the group aren't coaches. They're managers, leaders, employees who, in a peer coaching environment, they learn coaching skills, such as asking powerful questions, listening with deep presence, helping someone be accountable to move forward, having curiosity, being open to different perspectives. So that's a big, major difference. And it's a matter of people wanting ways to solve challenges and putting groups together, and having a certified coach act as a facilitator to hold the space so that the peers are learning from each other. They're learning to think in more expansive ways. And there's a lot of really exciting things going on in the government to further this idea that true workforce engagement happens when people feel heard and they have the opportunity to really look and share with others their perspectives. And I might say that person that got promoted to an SES, as a result, she is engaged and is experiencing workforce engagement in a way that she never did before for herself and others. And she says, I actively now elicit the perspectives and ideas of other people, and then I find they want to be responsible for those ideas, and that is workforce engagement. So I think with all of us wanting workforce engagement, peer coaching is an enormous tool to do that.
So foundational to that would be trust, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes that's hard to garner in organizations. Mm-hmm. How have you found that developed? How has that worked?
You know, that's a great question, Melanie. What the peer cohort members told me is, and like so much in organizations and in life, there's a hierarchy. Student, student teacher, boss employee, lawyer client. The list is endless. And yet in a peer cohort, everyone's equal. And they said that inspired them to be vulnerable. And every month they knew a different person was going to be a challenge owner. And that equality that vulnerability brought such trust. It wasn't like that in the beginning, Melanie. I must confess, in the beginning, they were guarded, they were uncertain, and they were not committed. And they admitted to me, all but one of them, that they did it because they wanted to check off the boss. The boss, check off the box. The boss said it was a good idea. But at the end, I wasn't prepared for the transformation. They called everybody family. They said, this is the first time I feel that I've been listened to, and all your life you think you know how to listen. No, I learned what really deep listening is. And so the trust developed as a result of the process. And the process of peer coaching is to look at different perspectives and to give people the tools to be able to think more, to think in new ways, like the kaleidoscope. Well, wow, it's so many possibilities. There isn't just one way.
Something you said that was really interesting is that, we talked about earlier that everyone is a unique observer. We all see differently. So anyone can coach anyone. It doesn't mean that only SESer can coach an SESer or 12 can coach a 12. It's very possible an SESer can be coached by, someone at a different level. Because we all see things differently, and that's powerful. And that's the power of diversity, is we all can add something, some different way of looking at something which other person may not see. And also what it triggers is that, how to build trust.
Right.
When people present ideas, oftentimes either we're judging, simply say thank you, right? Simply say thank you. Or are we listening to understand? Are we listening to respond? Or are we listening to, prove how smart I am or how wrong the other person is? How we listen matters. Just listen and say thank you and let the person finish. The simple, basic moves are very, very powerful. Yeah. How about Carrie, what are you doing with it? How are you applying this in your agency?
Yeah, there's so many ways to think about this. One of the things that I'm doing right now is a really complex project, and it's geared around getting leaders to see themselves as coaches, right? So to manage through a whole different lens. And what I love about this is, and the complexity, is it actually requires both leader and the people that they're supervising, right, to adopt a new perspective. So for the leaders, as coaches, the mindset shift or the perspective shift is to look at their employees, right? Look at the people on their teams as fully capable, right? Fully capable. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be able to figure out the problem, right? They're always going to have all the information, or even they're always going to have the skill sets, but fully capable, right? So that they could engage in a conversation, and through conversation and through coaching, listening, asking questions, sharing really powerful observations, that the team members can actually come up with what is going to be the best path forward for them, right? And that's that ownership that you're talking about, that they will own their path forward and be committed to it and follow through. For the team members, the real shift in perspective is actually seeing their manager as coach, and they're not used to that, right? In most organizational settings, we are used to getting direction from our leaders and or being ignored by them and sort of expected to just run on our own. And so seeing the leader as coach is a big mindset shift. And as you said, Melanie, so well, it requires trust on both ends. And so what I think is very interesting is that while an ounce of trust might be necessary to show up, right? So even if the trust was my manager told me to, right? An ounce of trust is required to show up. The process of listening and sharing perspectives and just being curious and open-minded and trying to appreciate one another's perspective builds trust. So only an ounce is required to show up. But if you can just get people there, right, in this space that you describe, or even in a one-on-one conversation that has a different trajectory to it, that has a trajectory of, again, how do you see this, right? What do you think is going on here? What do you think your options are? What do you think, right? And again, there's some degree of, here's what I know, and giving that to the person. And based on what I can contribute, what would you do with that? that is an incredibly different experience. And I absolutely think that it plays back into things like engagement, which is obviously something that the government is very concerned about.
Well, to that point, another thing that CAS is doing around engagement is I teach a 2-day coaching skills class on how to have informal, spontaneous, moment-to-moment coaching conversations that help people do exactly what we're talking about today. And the purpose of the design is it's open to GS4 all the way to SES. And people come that don't know each other from around the world and around the country, and they're not to talk about their grade or their title, because coaching conversations are about human conversations, and they don't have anything to do with grade. And so people leave the class feeling empowered. Wow, you know, I can ask these questions, I can listen, and it creates this engagement that, Carrie, you said the government is so passionate about doing. So it's, to your point, teaching people how to lead through coaching, and people lead at all levels.
And that's such a key point, I think, about leadership. And anyone who watches this knows that when I talk about a leader, they're at all levels. Just because you're at the top of the pyramid doesn't necessarily mean you're a leader. It means you're a manager, because you manage probably a lot of stuff, but doesn't mean you have those leadership capabilities. And so the idea of bringing people from GS4 to SES together into a room to offer insight to each other, I think is fantastic. I mean, that should be something that is done a lot more often, all around.
That's powerful.
That's a tremendous concept.
Well, it really is true diversity. It's looking at different people's thinking that goes way beyond grade. I mean, grade is important, and it's other than grade. And you know, the metaphor that I love about a great organization where people come to work every day eager and engaged is a symphony orchestra. You know, we've got flutes and we've got trombones and violins, and every voice is important and different and distinct and unique, and a flute is never going to sound like a trombone and shouldn't. And yet, great organizations allow each instrument, each voice to be heard. You never want the flutes to not have their voice, and great music is when all the voices are being heard. And I just think that coaching is a great tool to help people to get their voice heard and to really feel empowered that they have a choice and a voice that needs to be heard in a great organization.
So what would you do? I always like to get back to a lot of real life environments, because what we're talking about is fantastic. But in a lot of environments, they're not always opened to all of that. So how do you work with an environment and an organization that is more on the, let's use the word autocratic, type of style? You know, where it's much more of a, I'm the supervisor, you're the employee, this is what we're doing. You know, how do you kind of bring that change around? How do you create that?
You know, what comes up is that it triggers several thinking, right? We're talking about the Albert Einstein quote about changing thinking. So our traditional thinking has been the managers and leaders have all the answers, and the team members are the doers. It's really shifting from patriarchy to partnership, that we all matter. We all have a perspective. We all have a voice, right? So, and then to your question, Melanie, I think of what Stephen Covey said. You know, he said there's a circle of concern, there's a circle of influence, right? We can't change everything overnight.
Right.
Let's pick an area, maybe a project, maybe something that we can have influence on. Let's bring different perspectives into it, and let's see what happens. So pick an area where we can do something about, and let's not worry about where we can change it. So I say find pockets.
Right.
And as we begin to experience it, I think that circle, as Dr. Covey talks about, it begins to expand. So I think it's finding where can we try this out, and let the success, let the results and the engagement speak for itself. That's just what comes to my mind. How about both of you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not every organization like the one I was describing that takes a stand and says all leaders should now become coaches, right? That's rare. One thing that I've done in another organization is actually leverage the mentoring program, right? So you've got mentors who really want to be good mentors. And one of the biggest challenges that I've found in starting up mentoring programs is that even though people have a heart for mentoring, they don't really know the value that they offer. And quite honestly, when I meet with mentors, they often say, well, we've been meeting, but I don't know if I'm doing any good. And that's disheartening, right? And so leveraged a mentoring program to do what you're describing doing at USCIS, right? To empower the mentors to build some coaching skills. And now they have something that they can do in addition to some of the more classic mentoring responsibilities, right? In addition to sharing experiences and giving advice and advocating for people, they have a skill set that they can have some confidence in, and it gives them a real way to see the impact that they could have in a different way. So, yeah, I mean, that's one example of a pocket. For any given individual, though, right? You can talk about what can an organization do if you're an OD professional in an organization, but you can also think about this at the individual level, right? So for anybody watching, I would say that there's so much that you can do to simply, again, start to do little things. So even to the example of ask a few questions. If you're running a meeting, it might be as simple as, how do you all, this goes back to meeting agendas, right? And how we run our meetings. Simply asking, how are these meetings going, right? What do you think we're getting out of these meetings? And having a conversation about your conversation can be very powerful. And it's an easy way for a lot of leaders to start.
And also what comes to mind is we often, as human beings, we want the other person to change first. I say apply this to yourself, to myself. I remember when I was a younger leader, young leader, and I don't know how I led. I think I did a lot of damage, to be very honest. I used to think the way I see things, this is the way things are. I had the attitude, my way or the highway. I was a nightmare leader, I think, to be very honest with you. When I began to realize that, wait a minute, the way I see things is not the way things are, that was an eye-opener. Oh my God. I said, okay, now when I realized that I could begin to separate what's the fact and what's my interpretation, and can I on purpose begin to let go of my interpretation, be open to different possibilities, I began to show up differently. I began to be different. I began to ask and engage in different kind of conversations. So see how each of us can apply this learning to our own life. I think Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see. So how can we apply this to ourselves? I think that's the starting point. One of my favorite metaphors is pebble in the pond. As we change, we create different ripples out there. So I think that's the starting point, is how do we be different?
And I guess ultimately, you only have control over yourself, right?
That's all we have control over, really.
Right.
Our own thinking, our own actions, our own feelings and emotions.
Right.
That's all we control at the end of the day.
That's right.
Yeah, we'd like to control other things, but boy, it is hard.
That's right.
Yeah. So, as we've been talking about perspective and different thinking and different interpretation, it brings us to this quote by Thomas Edison. When we have exhausted all possibilities, remember you haven't. There's always another way of framing something. There's always another way of looking at it, right? And this brings to another quote, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll read it, because I think it's very powerful. It's one of my favorites. It's by R.D. Lang, and it says, the range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. And because we fail to notice, there's little we can do to change. Until we notice how failing to notice changes our thoughts and deeds. And what that means to me is simply that when we're looking on the world, realizing that I don't see the complete reality. I only see a part of it, but when I realize I only see a part of it, that opens me up to realize how much I don't see. And when I can see that and accept it, now I can bring other people into the conversation saying, help me see what I'm not seeing. Help me see it in ways that I'm not seeing it. And that's powerful. That's powerful. That's when change begins.
And Vinay,
Yes,
to that
please.
point, I think that's why peer coaching is so powerful, because you're hearing and seeing other ways to see things, and you're doing it with your peers. And that's what's so powerful, because you're changing the conversation in real time. And I think that's what's so powerful. You notice what you're not noticing, and through the peer coaching experience, you all see how you're all growing in new ways. And it's like the snowball effect.
What came up in my mind as you were speaking is that metaphor, we all, as we learn from each other, we feel valued, we feel engaged, and we lift each other up. That old saying that rising tide raises all ships, that's somehow part of my thinking as you were speaking, Lynn, is as we share, we support each other, we become stronger together. Isn't that what team is, right? Together, everyone achieves more,
Yes, success is a team sport.
right?
So one really tangible example this brings up for me, right? And the picture that's in our slide there, I don't know if people can see it clearly enough. It is a herd of sheep, right, leaving the stall, but there's no fence. There's only the gate that was there. It's so funny. And so for a leader, one of the most powerful questions you can ask is simply, what am I missing, right? It really gets at this R.D. Laing quote, until we notice how failing to notice changes our thoughts and needs, right? So you've got to notice that you fail to notice. And the simple question of, what am I missing here, right? It's a safe question. It's one that really can bring people in. And I just imagine one of the sheep saying, what are we not noticing, right? What are we missing here? Oh, there's no fence, right? Like, why are we all going for this one gate? And how often we do that in organizations. We will all hurt ourselves in one direction, and there was no fence in the first place.
That reminds me of one of my dear friends, Wendy Luke. One of her favorite questions is, whose voice I haven't heard lately? And whose voice do I need to bring into this conversation? It's an amazing question that Wendy brings up many, many times. It's really speaking to this, isn't it? About what question haven't I asked? Whose voice I haven't heard lately? Yeah. Great human being, so that's a very powerful question.
What assumption might I be making?
Yeah. What lens am I looking through?
So I hate to do this, but we only have a few more minutes left.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do each month is leave the audience with a few key points that after watching this, they can walk away, go back to their office environment, and begin implementing something right away. So what would those couple of points be?
So I just quickly touch on this, is really begin to separate what's the fact in the situation, and what's my interpretation, how I'm looking at it, and how else can I take a look at it? Is there another way to look at the situation? So separating the event from the explanation, from the fact from the interpretation, and on purpose, see, are there other ways of looking at the situation? And I would say bring other voices into the conversation that are very different. We want people in our lives who see things differently than we do, not the same way. And also, I would say, finally create a culture of safety. I find people will not share their thinking until they feel really safe. You spoke of trust. Trust is critical, that everybody feels they value, they matter, and whatever they share, it's not being judged. Culture of safety is important for this to work.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And I love this idea about separating the fact from the interpretation, because we don't often do that. Because when we give a scenario of an event, it's not always the facts, it's our interpretation of the facts, oftentimes. So just separating those two things out, I think, is pivotal. So,
Indeed.
So with that, let me thank all of you for being our guests today. I appreciate that very much. And for our audience, thank you very much for being with us. And please join us again next month for the HUD OCIO Learning Session, and have a wonderful day.